Okay.
Give it to me.
Okay. I'm going to start with where I left off when I introduced you. I mentioned, I know both you and ZAHA, you probably, feel you're more like world citizens. I mentioned you being German, but indeed, in your lecture, there's this urge to talk about a systematic order in our project. And the way you wanted to set up the world. So I'm going to set this. And since we're here in Taiwan, I'm going to say that if you come to, when it comes to Chinese food, there's something called bao tang soup. And then ping pan, the platter. In something equivalent to the Western dishes, it might be a melting pot. Bao tang. And then salad bowl, which means something is stirred together. One of which people would call it multiculturalism, while the other is probably pluralism. You're offering something quite different, the third kind. For me, it's sort of like 烤鸭, Beijing 烤鸭, or 烤鸭三吃, the duck, which, is same duck, but because of the different parts, they cook it differently, but it's all duck. And yet, I want to ask you, don't you feel something that sometimes you need to have some vegetables? 我问那个Patrik， 我说有的时候我们在谈这个世界的时候，目前有两种看法，一种叫做多元主义，一种叫做这个文化多元。我等一下再想这个更好的翻译，pluralism 跟 multiculturalism。一种很像我们的煲汤，什么都混在一起；另外一种像我们的拼盘，所有的东西都一样重要。我就说它呢，因为可能是希望有一个完整的秩序，所以很像烤鸭那种或一鱼三吃。但是有的时候我们不会想要多吃点其他的味道吗？这是我问 Patrik 的第一个问题。
Hey, I have my own metaphors when it comes.
Sure.
So, yes, I'm very interested in the systematic, in systems, but these systems are not simple systems, they're complex, variegated orders, so there's many things coming together, but they relate and adapt to each other to form something whole. And so for me the metaphor is this: I reject the current pluralism of styles. I reject the contemporary, this idea of a fetishized multiculturalism where we are asked to celebrate incompatible cultures and ask them to live together. What I believe is though that there are many subsidiary cultures to a world culture, for instance, and many subsidiary and creative ways of using an architectural style into one global urban texture which must be coherent. And for me it's a bit like this. Let's take the whole ecosystem of such the valleys I've been showing. Many different species, plant species, animal species, whereas inorganic natural systems like rivers and rocks and so on. But they all come together, belong together, evolve together. And then you have a water world, a different ecosystem. And there's an enormous richness and variety. But we need to know which one we are. And the contemporary pluralism and multiculturalism thinks that you can throw the water world together into that valley, and you think you have even more intricacy and richness. No, you generate chaos. So I think that's my metaphor. We need to choose an ecosystem. And that doesn't mean that we're sterile, that I'm kind of a one fits all, not at all. But we also have to be able to say this doesn't belong here, this is polluting that valley. And so we need to be confident that we're converging towards one coherent global world culture. There's many different subsidiary cultures which belong together, but then there are also alien cultures. which we should invite to adapt and learn and evolve into the system, rather than being kind of the same with architectures which are outmoded, which are anachronisms. The same as you can't reinvite the dinosaurs into this valley. It will just wreak havoc. So that's my metaphor. I love ecological integrate systems, but they are coherent and systematic.
OK， 那我这边呢，刚才您提到的这种一鱼三吃的这个类比，那其实我自己要提出我的类比。那当然，我对于系统是非常有兴趣的。那系统的特色就是它有很高度的复杂性，所以这当中有许多不同的元素、不同的东西。但是这些不同的元素，它其实是要有互相的相关性、相连性，来形成一个更大的一个整体。所以其实我的立场，我是会 reject， 我不喜欢的是这种把所谓的多元文化风格是一个强制一些不同，就是原本可能是不相符合的文化，也要强制他们来融合。那这个部分的话，其实我是不太认同的。我认为，我们有一个世界文化，而这世界文化之下，其实有很多不同的文化。那我们所看到的这种全球的城市化，其实比较是把所有的东西都要强硬式的整合在一起。那这个部分我可能就不太认同。那我比较想要提出我自己的一个类比，是所谓的生态系统的类比。在一个生态系统里面有不同的动植物，那也有这个比如说河川啊、水流等等。那这些所有的元素，它会整合在一起，然后成为一个更大的整体。所以我们必须要选择说，我们是一个什么样的生态系统，但是你不能够强制，比如说把水还有跟其他不同的这种动植物，就说不同的系统，你把它全部连在一起，因为这样的话就变成说你是强制这些不同的元素都要被整合。所以我认为说，我所谓的系统并不是一个一体适用的，也许有些时候呢，有些元素它可能是一种污染，那我们也必须要把它点出来。所以在文化里面也有一些不同的元素，可能是不相容的。所以，例如说我们可能没有办法说我们要把恐龙整合到我们的年代里面。所以，即便是在这个所谓系统的概念下，我们还是要注意到这个一致性的问题。
Okay, Patrick, but who's making the decision of what made into the system and what leaves out? And to play into parametricism, at least there's 3 actors, if you will, agent, maybe, actors as well. The architect, the scripter, who writes the code, the program, and maybe AI. After AlphaGo, there's something that's there and that's the work. But who is the one making this judgment? I think it's still you, right? So how does it work, really? I mean, who selects what into the system? And what leaves out? And what makes it work? What makes it so sure that you'll be making the right decision? 所以我说好啊，那我喜欢这个类比，可是这个在这个建筑的这个参数化设计里面，对我来说至少有3个可能的决定者。一个当然就是那个建筑师所设计的人，第二个是写那个参数程式的人，第3个是可能是人工智慧。那到底是谁？那如果这个是建筑师的话，怎么确认这个你做的事情是对这个参数化的选择是对的？
I mean, in terms of the decisions of what you might call the physiognomy of the built environment, or the look and feel and form of the environment, is the architect's decision task. Of course, and his expertise, how this fits in and facilitates the client's offering to society of an institution, of a place. That's the final driver. But the client has an imagination in a sense, maybe what kind of place a club or it's a university, a school, what the social outcome should be, what the learning experience should be. There's an intuition there from a client, and then he hires an architect and tries to mediate the life process he's imagining, and the architect has to become the expert. What kind of spatial configuration would facilitate that? And that's our task. Now, how do we get there? We have a certain palette of repertoire of imagining and making offerings and putting in front of ourselves something. And our duty is to try to imagine what it might imply and mean for the client. And we also invite the client. We have to be plausible and convincing. When it comes to computational tools, yes, we always depend on other experts playing towards us. We might be able to play on the software model or build up a grasshopper definition. We do this, but the whole system of a software package and the grasshopper tool is obviously something which comes through others. But we are their clients, and they are observing us and what we need. So there's a kind of chain of collaboration. There's no final authors, there's many aspects that come together, same with all the engineering constraints. We have a field of experts feeding in and giving us constraints, but we orchestrating and making the final decision relatively into what we propose to the client, and then we see feedback. There's no finality in this. There's no, in a sophisticated but sure discourse, no willfulness necessarily in this, but from our perspective, an openness, a versatility. You don't have, I think mature architect shouldn't have a particular prejudice, wanting to look in a particular way for his own kind of personal ego taste reasons. This kind of intuitions need to be critically reflected. Sometimes these intuitions mean something, you can also trust our intuitions, but I think we should critically reflect them. So in the end, there is an overall evolving rationality if the various experts play their role in a mature way, and we are kind of playing the visual, spatial, morphological constitution of the environment, but under a whole set of criteria. So the final choice isn't, oh, I like this. The choice is, hey, this is what delivers for all these constraints. This is the way we fit in and enhance the life of this institution. And there's a value chain where we're coming second to the client. The client is that entrepreneur who's making the offering, and we're just the means to his end.
Okay.
其实我们在做这个决定的过程里面呢，是我们要去看这个环境，我们要去感知这个环境，还有它的一个形式是什么。所以在这当中，其实我们是互相跟客户还有不同的专家合作之后，所共同的来做这个决定。那当然最重要的就是说，我们是有客户的，所以客户他希望这个建筑它对社会的贡献是什么，他们的想象是什么。他今天要建的是一个学校，还是他有特定的社会的意义，或者是说他想要塑造某一种学习的经验等等。那我们作为一个建筑师，我们就是要在这当中去折冲，然后去达到客户想要做的事情，这是我们的工作。那我们怎么达到这个工作呢？达到这个目标呢？其实我们就是有很多的工具箱，包括刚才说到的，我们有电脑，我们有软体，然后我们会跟客户必须要跟他们互动。所以说，这个系统其实就是我们跟客户的互动，所以其实没有一个所谓的 final author， 没有一个最终的一个作者。那是就像我刚刚说的，我们也会邀请很多不同的专家，所以在这个过程里面，我们的心态其实是心态是开放的，而且呢，我们是愿意去适应环境的，所以是并不是说我们有一个先决的条件，或者说我们有一个先决的刻板印象，那而且呢，也不是我们自己的决定，所以很多时候不是说我喜欢来决定。虽然说我们在决定的过程当中也必须要相信自己的直觉，但是其实它有一点像是一个演化的过程，在这里面所有的不同的专家 互动，然后去思考的重点是说，最后可以 deliver 怎么样来达到这个我们要的成果。那包括这当中会有一些不同的限制，所以怎么样在这些不同的限制之下去达到客户他想要达到的成果。
Okay, I mentioned during the break I'm going to have 2 really stupid questions. Beijing duck, Peking duck is one of them. The other one, here it comes. Okay, Patrick, I agree that you don't want no rigid form and no repetition. And what's the third one? No collage, exactly. It doesn't mean it has to be curved. So why curves? 我的第二个比较这个是直接的纯问题是，为什么一定老是需要曲线？
What we discovered, we started without curves, with less curves, far less curves, but opened up the angles in a composition. Then we started to layer, to put one space cutting into another and interpenetrate, to make complex, to generate overlap between spaces. Once you do that, you realize that the composition collapses into some kind of kaleidoscopic splintering. So what we discovered, and then if you want to make a path through this kind of complex maze, this path keeps breaking at the corners visually. So there becomes, you can't even orient yourself in your own drawing anymore, which is a good prediction of anybody being able to orient in the building.
So the curvature comes in basically as, my headline here is maintaining legibility, tractability in the face of increasing complexity. So curvature, there's one motivation for curvature in terms of phenomenology. The other element of curvature is it comes naturally in structural systems. You find curvature in nature all the time. There's already efficiency aspect in the curvature. If you look at how you inhabit space and how people move and roam around, they never sit in the corner or occupy the corner as much, etc. in larger spaces. So and we don't, when it comes to larger territories, you want to move diagonally sometimes, but then you want to shift direction. So a number of pragmatic problem-solving conditions in the face of complexity has led us to curves. So curves are not something I love curve. Yes, we should love curve and we do like them, but I can fully rationalize as the most rational way to design complex environments.
我非常喜欢这个 curvature， 就是曲线的最大的原因，其实就是它可以把角度打开，就是在构图上，你可以变成比较开放的一个形式，然后有不同的空间，它会彼此的交叠。那这时候呢，其实就可以达到我们所要的这个比较开放的一个空间的一个这样的一个目的。所以呢，另外呢，就是如果说我们看到传统的这个。建筑的话，它可能就是一个会很像一个迷宫一样，就是你会找到方向。那所以，我们希望能够改变这样的状况。我希望做到所谓的 legibility， 就是可读性，让这个整个建筑的空间它是可阅读的、可辨识的。那第二个原因的话呢，其实就是在整个的结构上呢，我们希望建筑是可以师法自然的，所以如果你去观察人的动作的话，通常人不会自己坐在一个角落，他其实是会移动的，他可能会往前，他会往后，他会移动，所以应该是说曲线其实是我们所提出来的一个解决方案。当然我也非常的喜欢曲线，但是这不仅止于此，应该是说曲线是我可以找到的一个最有逻辑的一个答案。
Well, yes, and yet we're the one who made the decision. And we will know curves. What happened with your parametric system 2.0 maybe is that after ZHA, there's SOM, And then 2 weeks ago, I witnessed in the airport that Guangdong Design Institute were doing, and it's all curves and all of that. What worries me is that when you have, and I'm sure this is not the very first time it's been brought up, you have another international style come. That is, with all the parameter system, with the grasshopper, with the algorithm, everybody was more or less doing the same thing. And when that start happening, and let's take the lesson from history, the modern movement became international style. It lost its political edge. You do have a social agenda from you just saw. You actually have a very strong social agenda. And I'm a bit nervous, or rather, I'm rather nervous because with all these things about criticism about parametricism and all that, is that it became a formal, stylish movement rather than having people to see through the agenda you have, the goal that you want to achieve, to establish this new system of order for the society. Now, how do you prevent the pitfall from that? 那个看到那个参数2.0，然后它有非常多的这个跟随者，像 SOM 也开始学 ZAHA， 或者是我发现大陆非常多的设计院，好的设计院已经非常能够做参数化设计，结合变做得非常的好。那么让我开始忧虑，这个在这样的状况底下，会像历史上面的这个国际式样，也就是说，国际式样在变成国际式样之前，是一个现代主义运动。那我们谈现代运动的是，它是一个社会意义在后面的，在后面有一个理想。然而今天它变成一个样式以后，我们就看不见了。那我就问 Patrik 说，在这个它背后有一个非常强烈要把整个社会再带到有一个这个系统的这个和谐状态的这个思考底下，可是它的这个形式已经变成一种样式的时候，这难道不是一个危险吗？它怎么避免再掉入这个历史失败的窠臼里面？
Well, I'm aware of this, that when you go from avant-garde to mainstream, from the leaders of the field into a rollout condition, that there is a certain extent of information loss, there's a certain risk of motivations and rationales getting lost, and you get superficial replicas. But I still think avant-garde must push into mainstream. So for me, the shift from the modernism of Le Corbusier and Mies and so on into some kind of mainstream international style is something which redeems their efforts, their avant-garde efforts. I showed you this image of the drawing of Le Corbusier and kind of a Beijing skyline, and I say there is some information loss, but there is impact, and there is still rationality at play. Maybe not 100%, but maybe 80% is good enough. And when clients are there and probe, and an architect, parametricism, epigons, if you like, but I wouldn't call them, the later rollout, they have more facility at play to satisfy requirements which still come. Clients, final customers, through clients, engineers, and all sorts of systems have to satisfy. Now with an expanded repertoire, this will be a better solution. They will be empowered to deliver that. Maybe even if they don't have the discursive self-reflection, these things can be rolled out. Things become effective, even if there is information loss and discursive reflectivity loss in a lot of the rollouts. But then we also have critics, and we observe, and we argue and write, and important projects will be in the discursive domain. I think that therefore it is still overall positive. and I'm endorsing the SOMs and the KPFs and the big design institutes to come on and try this out. And you will use cursors, show what you can do with cursors. Of course, mistakes can be made, particularly if the constraints are loosened too much. So there's too much budget in there. And there's a kind of scope, and there's a forgetting and the willfulness. Then it becomes something. This happened a little in Dubai. And we've been tainted by this a little bit. A kind of irrational exuberance, let's say. Not only in the economy, but also in the architectural expression. That to me, the distance does have been criticized. But overall, I'm not afraid, and I don't want to rarify our work, and ZAHA never wanted to. So this is meant to really be transformative and become an avalanche of transformation. And that for me means that mistakes will be made, but it's an overall positive.
其实你刚刚讲的状况，我也是知道的。那我们其实看到，前卫主义在成为主流的这样的过程当中，当然会有一些资讯的流失，这当然也是一个风险。我们也会看到一些比较肤浅的这种复制品，但是我还是认为前卫主义应该要成为主流，因为这样子它才能够产生它的效果。那这也是为什么我会还是继续的坚持下去，因为其实我们在为客户的这个打造这个建筑的过程当中，就可以因为参数主义它变成一个主流之后，它等于就是让大家都更了解怎么样去实现这样子的建筑。那对于建筑师来讲，其实它就是多了一个工具，让他能够在设计的时候更容易去达到客户他所要的一个解决的方式。所以事实上，对于建筑来讲，这是一个可以赋予他们更多的能力跟权利的一个工具。当然，也许有一些人他在使用的过程当中就没有达到一个所谓的自我反省，但是呢，透过把这个参数主义推广的这样的一个过程，其实还是可以达到一个更好的我刚刚讲的这种效果。所以我们还是会继续的辩论下去。那虽然说有一些不太好的这种状况，但我认为整体来讲，这样的一个发展还是正面的。那我自己是为刚才您提到的这些复制，其实我认为我是背书的，我是支持他们的。那当然也可能会有一些滥用的状况，比如说在杜拜会有一些这样的例子，所以尽管有一些负面，但我认为整体来讲，这个推动的过程还是可以改变建筑的这个发展。
Okay, Patrik suggests that I should open the question to the floor, but I would like to ask one question to open up to the floor, to lead to the question from the floor. What I was trying to say is that there's a lot of younger students who's using these computational tools and softwares, and yet I have a sense that a lot of time they will ask themselves the same question that I probably ask, who's making the decision and why is this one better than that one and all that. And of course, all the criticism from the senior generations and parametricism doesn't help. Do you have anything to say to encourage them, to suggest something to them?
Read my books. That will help you to get the arguments. Because it's true, I mean, at the beginning, we're just playing with these softwares, and we weren't worried about what does it mean and which one is better. It just felt empowered. But of course, reality check will come in, and then you need to make arguments. What's the advantages? And you'll find those if you go back to the lecture, once it's on YouTube, or go through my writings and books. And you need to study more. You're not in the phase anymore, we're just toying around. We have critical eyes watching all what we're doing, and we need to be able to justify it. So find the arguments and make the arguments. You have the right intuitions that this is advantageous, but you need to demonstrate an argument.
OK， 您刚刚的问题是说学生他们要怎么样来看待这个论述？那当然最好的方式就是要来看我的书跟我的论述。那当然在一开始的时候，其实我们也不太确定这个意义在哪里。其实我们只是实验性的在玩这些软体。那当然最后你还是要有一个 reality check， 你还是要看现实的状况是什么，你的论点是什么。所以非常欢迎大家就是上网去看我的一些演讲啊，或是书，因为最终你在做决定之后，你其实必须要能够提出自己的论点。
OK， 我们现在只剩下这个10分钟，所以请大家来加入这个讨论。我刚刚都问过那种北京烤鸭3吃了，应该可以问更多。好的。
你好，教授。你好 ，Patrik。说中文可以吗？我想请问，不晓得您如何看那个在北京跟 SOHO 中国合作的那个银河 SOHO， 因为它是如此的美丽、巨大而且卓越，而且它的外表是有机的，根据你们的建筑概念，但是它内部是有机的吗？就因为它如此的巨大，它有办法保证说它内部的运作是很节能、是很有效率的吗？谢谢。然后第二个问题，在ZAHA女士过世之后，我们要如何带领我们这个ZAHA建筑师团队仍然保持在世界卓越的领先？然后第三点，最近在台北市信义区有一个新的建案。是一个旋转的，叫桃竹影园，不晓得 Patrik 有没有听说过？您如何评价这个新的建案？谢谢。
Thank you for the question. So, with respect to Galaxy, what we find very satisfying is not so much an efficiency in terms of square meter occupiable versus circulatory ratios and such things, or envelope to surface ratios, where how you measure efficiency in terms of technical criteria. What we're interested in there is the way it sustains an urban space with a lot of intervisibility, a lot of offerings across levels, to create a life process, sustain an urban life process. And what we love about the project, you step in and you have so many things at offer, so many things simultaneously in view, and you can move through it. There's a coherence between exterior image, interior spaces, then the real internal atriums. There's a lot of transparency, and I feel empowered and thrilled when I step in there. And we have our own office there. It's very lively, very much a thriving place. So I find it very successful as a social place. And this is something you just intuitive. And now with these new tools I showed at the end of the lecture, one could start to comparatively measure post-occupancy or in the future simulate for projects what the probabilities are for engendering such a life process. So I think that's very important. With respect to ZAHA Architects, the second question, and future leadership, I've been leading the firm with ZAHA for many years. I mean, I started as a student, she's a founder, but I became a kind of important part of the development of the firm a few years into my emergence there, and we've developed the firm together into that. So that continues, and it's not only my person, there are many other major figures and contributors which have their own name in the field as well as mature architects who believe in the collective project of this firm, and that continues the legacy and the future development. And we're always interested in research to push forward, while we also want to build a business which is competent and potent to roll out, help the rollout, as well as help the research frontier. And invite every young and bright talented student not only to read my books, but to learn up the skills, understand the work, and join us. Hopefully with opportunities here in Taipei as well.
OK， 所以刚才提到第一个问题，其实我们在衡量这些所谓的效率的时候，其实是有一些不同的标准。那对我来讲，重点应该是在于说，我们能够怎么样持续这个生命的这个城市的一个生命力，就是让不同的空间它会有一个互相的一个可见性。所以我们在做这个建案的时候，其实我们是希望它能够同时提供许多的功能，然后它的内外的空间是有很多的互动的，所以我们使用很多天井，然后很多的透明度，所以当我踏入这个空间的时候，我觉得是很有力量的。我认为它是一个很成功的建案，因为在社会的功能上面，其实它是可以达到非常好的效果。那第二个问题呢，就是我跟ZAHA HADID，其实我们是多年的合作。那其实在事务所一段时间之后，我就成为了这个领导人这样的一个角色。那这个角色也会持续下去。那当然，我们在 ZHA 所有的建筑师，我们也都有共同的信念，所以我想我们就是会持续我们的工作。另外，这个工作的另外一点，当然就是所谓的研究的这个层面。那我们也会在研究的部分继续的持续进行。所以我也非常希望年轻的学子，大家可以除了看我的书之外，也可以去学习这些技术跟技巧，那未来可以加入我们。
来，我们再欢迎几个问题，非常难的。
Hello. Hi, Patrick. I'm sorry, I have to provide some background first for my question. Okay, I've been attending in the last few years an architectural convention in Texas, U.S. And they have a special segment that's been going on for 5 or 6 years. It's entitled Emerging Design. From what I understand, they send out invitation to the world's leading young scholars studying this kind of thing and solicit and chose about 12 papers and give these people a platform to present their studies. So I've been seeing that for maybe 25 sessions or so. And these give you a lot of excitement because these young people obviously are the brains of the future. They're very well studied. They have PhDs. They teach all over the world at the best academies, etc. However, and they struggle. They all refer to themselves as disciples of parametricism or tectonicism. And they struggle to write out algorithms which will produce then a form that looks like what we'd like to see, what we're seeing here. And they then struggle to produce via industrial means or technological means, produce that structure. And that's where they fall short, because it's always a disappointment that they ended up apologizing and admitting to the limitations. However, it seems like for the brave new world that you described, that we believe in, for that to take place, some kind of accommodation, some kind of technological advancement will be necessary to accommodate, to install this brave new world. And there seems to be a great disparity. Are they barking up the wrong tree? Are they off to a corner? How do you see that fit into your mission?
Thank you for the question. No, I don't think they're barking up the wrong tree. And I suspect as research papers in a PhD kind of scenario, there's always the attempt to go beyond, to push boundaries, to posit potentials which aren't yet trivially realizable. But a lot of what we're talking about has been realized. And I've just been at a workshop in Tongji University where they use a lot of robotics lab to produce a lot of complex and interesting and lightweight and high performance structures within a very short period of time, within 3 weeks. There's a lot of this flourishing around the world. There's a lot of startup companies, there's an entrepreneurial flourish. And I think the skills are there. And the technologies are there, and of course we're just at the beginning of investing systematically in these technologies and capacities. But contractors are coming in and starting to invest. So this is just the beginning, I think. It is certainly something which is very tangible to be impactful in the next 10-20 years, and already available for those who want to invest in their buildings. Because for me this is on the cost side of things. Costs are coming down continuously with additional investment in these technologies of fabrication. But also on the benefit side, we need to make the arguments and demonstrate more that these investments in a more complex and more porous and open building have huge social functionality and productivity benefits for those institutions. So the cost-benefit analysis needs to come through. I think there's nothing else on the horizon, I would argue, in terms of architecture. All the other offers are retro offers. And I'll challenge anybody to give me another innovative movement which works with the challenges and opportunities of our age. That's why I think the hegemony or the inevitability of parameterism to that extent has been established.
回答您的问题，我不觉得这些学生他们是误用他们的潜力，或者说他们的思考可能是过于理想化这样子。那其实当然在 PhD 啊或者是学术的研究领域里面，本来就是要去尽量的去推动，尽量去实验这些不同的想法，所以找到这些理论它的一个潜力在哪里。那么从另外一个层面来看，其实我们所发想的这些很多的理念，许多也已经实现了，包括我们有这个机器人学实验室，在这当中我们也产出了许多的这种具有复杂性的风格的建筑，但是同时也是高性能的，所以也有很多的创新公司他们在做这样的事情。目前来讲，我们应该是我们有足够的技能，我们有足够的科技，那很多人也会开始去投资在这方面，所以其实我们现在应该只是在一个很起步的阶段，但是我认为这个参数主义应该是一个可以带来很实质成果的一个运动，所以如果从成本跟它的一个效益来说的话，当然是有一些成本，但是我认为它的效益是在于说它是能够达到或是成就一个更加开放，然后更加复杂的一个建筑风格，而这样的建筑风格是可以达到更好的社会功能。那我认为在目前我们所看到的，并没有其他的一个建筑的主义可以来达到这样的一个更高的社会功能。在其他的其他的理论来讲的话，他们会是我认为比较过时的。但是我们必须要创新，因为我们必须要去面对我们这个时代的问题跟挑战。
The last question.
感谢今天的Patrik 的演讲，然后也感谢刚刚两位的对谈，会让我觉得获益良多。那接下来我有3个问题想要提问，第一个问题是我想要请问说，像 Patrik 今天讲到的那些参数化的设计，在这部分来讲，是不是会遇到一些现有的挑战？虽然说目前建筑设计所已经有做一些现有的文化或者是纹理对应到那个建筑的表现上面，可是是不是会遇到一些挑战，像是周边城市已经既有的景观这种事情如何去面对？比方说这件事情在台湾来说，可能就会面临到很多周边城市的建筑物原本的一些风格的不同。这个部分如果是在 Patrik 里头讲到的那些参数化的设计，有些是很理想式的一些想法，那如何融入在城市里面？这是第一个问题。那第二个问题是我想要请问说，刚刚 Patrik 最后有提到人的行为在空间里头这件事情，那我觉得这件事情是蛮有趣，也是一个蛮特别的一个设计的先前的一个研究行为。那这样子的事情，它如何在不同的文化人类，不同的城市或者是不同的国家的文化上面的人的行为如何在空间里面在做设计的时候去做一个这样子的研究？那 第三个问题就是想要确认说，就是在 Patrik 设计像博物馆等这种类似的那种公众的一些开放式的建筑的时候，就是相对于其他的私人建筑或者是比较像是比较像是开放式的建筑，相对来说开放式的建筑就是在 Patrik 的设计里头说，就是怎么样子去注重，就是最注重的部分是什么样子的部分这样。最后一个部分就是想要确认说是就是在相对于其他设计来说，公众的就是像博物馆这样子公众开放公众的设计最注重的部分是什么样子的部分？是不是人的行为还是什么样的其他的部分这样子？
Yeah, thank you for the questions. First question was about the embedding of architecture into landscapes and the sensitivity of maybe the beauty of the landscape setting. And first of all, parametrism is mostly geared to urban centers and urban densification, because that's where the civilization is working the hardest and architecture working the hardest. But it is also, I think, very clear that urban settlements as well as buildings under the principles of parametrism can fit themselves much more elegantly into a landscape setting and will appear much more harmonious because they are inherently adaptive and affiliated. So I think there will be less sense of polluting a landscape with built forms than modernism. Second question was on the aspect of behavioral specificities in various cultures, maybe projects, regions, and I do believe that there's something universal about contemporary world culture. I notice this when I'm working with students from around the world as professionals. They participate in a global discourse and have various patterns of contemporary life behavior. And we could expect in working environments particular principles to operate around the world. But there are also differences and nuances, and this paradigm of life process modeling has inbuilt a loop of empirical calibration where we look at local conditions and not only cultural conditions but company specific behaviors, corporate cultures, and how they might be impacted and be taken account of. So this is inherently inside the paradigm already reflected, that these crowds are not generic and universal crowds, they're culturally specific and differentiated crowds. When it comes to museums and cultural buildings of communication, like museums are very important, I think, for cities. I like to see them not so much as tourist attractions for mass audiences, but for hubs, for creative industry, communication with a lot of openings and lectures and events. They are very specific, I think, instruments of forging professional communication in cities. And that's why they should be quite open and versatile and activated a lot. That's what I see an institution like Maxi, for instance, to be very important for Italy's creative industries, for instance, and other such buildings we've created in Cincinnati and elsewhere. So for me, they are part of the texture of network society and very important.
首先您的第一个问题就是我们要如何去适应这个周围的景观。那我觉得参数主义应该是最关注城市市中心还有城市的一个这个紧密的发展。所以我们在设计的过程里面。我们其实是会关照这个周围的景观，那我也认为参数主义它是最能够达到就是比较优雅的去适应这个整个的地形环境，那达到一个比较和谐的一个状况。因为呢， 透过参数主义，其实它会有比较少的这种视觉污染。那我所讲的是说，相对于现代主义来说的话，那第二个问题就是说，在每一个地区、每一个国家，当然都有一些不同的文化。当然我们也可以看到，就是说整个全球的现代社会是有很多的一些共同点或是共同的行为，但是当中其实还是有一些差异的。那其实我们也会去关注这些差异，特别是企业行为的差异，那这也就会反映在我们的设计里面，所以它并不是一个一体适用，就是它还是有差异性在的。那就博物馆的这个设计来看呢，其实它应该是一个可以让人互相沟通的地方，而不是只是成为一个好像游客去的地方。我更希望的是这些有创意的人，他们可以在这个空间里面对话，或是专业的人士，他们可以在这个空间里面对话。那它也可以成为一个开放的空间，可以举行例如说演讲啊等等这样的活动。那其实这样的理念也实现在我们过去的一些建案里面，比如说像罗马的 Maxi 或者是辛辛那提的博物馆。所以也就是说，其实博物馆它其实是这整个社会的一个组织，它的脉络的一部分。
那个时间差不多了，那我想最后做一个非常简单的 wrap up。那我一定要也用一个开玩笑的方法来说一下，你如果把 ZHA 念在一块儿，念很快，它就是很沙。Right? ZAHA 跟 Patrik 对我来讲，我看着他们永远是在往前走。那么 Patrik 刚刚说了一句话，他说其他现在在世界上发生的跟建筑有关的都是在往后看的，只有我的这个参数化主义是在往前看的。这种往前看，刚刚讲到美丽新世界这个词儿 Great New World， 事实上是一个非常好的形容ZHA 这个HADID跟这个事务所企图如何这个跟这个世界连接，并且往前走。那这就是我每一次看他们的作品所震撼的地方。我本来对这个 ZHA 的这个参数化的设计也许会有一些评论。比如说，我完全知道 Patrik 受这个德国的社会主义学家 Nicola Luhmann 的影响非常的深。那么我当然知道 differentiation 这些事情在参数化的形式设计上面是影响非常强烈的。但是Luhmann 的另外一个关于 communication 的部分，本来是我会今天要问他的一个重要的问题。不过后来我没有问的原因是他虽然讲得非常快，在最后那一大段他已经在处理 communication 那一段了。这就是我说的，他们很沙，很往前走，永远往前看，这就是我非常敬佩的地方。那我刚刚问了 Patrik， 他如果不介意我引述他的一段话来作为向他致敬，向 ZHA 致敬的一个结束。它是英文，我抱歉，这是因为他说的。他说 ：“The death of architecture is always near. The discourse has the responsibility to keep it relevant, to adopt, to understand, to make itself congenial and relevant to the rest of the society. But in doing so, ideally, we should be autonomous. The rationality of this is that we have an expertise discourse.But we are able to absorb challenges and informations and work through these challenges and informations on the basis of accumulations of wisdom. 那对他来讲，这种 accumulation of wisdom 用参数化的方法是最容易得到的。那谢谢 Patrik， 谢谢大家待到这么晚，希望有机会可以看到他们这个往这个美丽新世界迈进的这些作品。谢谢大家。